Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
Art for everyone. Isn't that just like caviar for the masses?
The trouble with the classicist, he looks at a tree. That's all he sees, he paints a tree. The trouble with the classicist, he looks at the sky. He doesn't ask why, he just paints a sky. The trouble with the classicist.
Art that's not for everyone is self-indulgent and elitist.
Art made for the masses is just commercial tripe.
Can't art be accessible without sacrificing quality?
Can't art be cognitively challenging without being elitist?
Sometimes artists have goals they can only pursue at the expense of accessibility.
Our guest is Catharine Abell from the University of Oxford, author of Fiction, A Philosophical Analysis.
I don't think difficulty in and of itself is valuable.
The Arts for All?
Coming up on Philosophy Talk. Should artworks be accessible to everyone?
Is it elitist to make art that's difficult to understand?
Or is popular art just trash?
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Josh Landy.
And I'm Ray Briggs. We're coming to you from our respective living rooms via the studios of KALW San Francisco.
Continuing conversations that begin at Philosopher's Corner on the Stanford campus, where Ray teaches philosophy and I direct the Philosophy and Literature Initiative.
Today we're asking, are the arts for all of us?
Oh, I definitely think the arts should be for everyone. Like I think we need to subsidize museums so everyone can get in for free. Too many people get excluded because they can't afford those exorbitant ticket prices.
That's a start, but it's not the only kind of exclusion there is. Let's say we implement your generous ticket policy, and now everyone can go to the museum. What are they going to do once they're in there?
Well, I don't know, look at the pictures like everyone else?
But how are they going to understand them if they haven't been to snooty high schools and fancy colleges like you? You need to know a ton of stuff about art history just to make sense of half of the paintings. Who has time and money for that?
Well, I mean, that's not unique to art. Think about video games, rock music, or even memes. Like, I'm a middle-aged guy, and I often have trouble understanding my students' jokes. There's nothing snooty or fancy about memes. It's just that if you don't get the reference, you don't get the joke.
Gee, Josh, that's a real galaxy brain take.
What's a galaxy brain?
My point exactly.
No, my point exactly. Lots of domains require background knowledge, memes, medicine, philosophy, even sports. Sometimes conversations just get a little, what's the word? Inside baseball? There's nothing special about art in this regard.
Well, okay, maybe. But there is something special about art. And that's that art gives you cultural cred. Knowing lots of baseball stats might be fun, but knowing who painted Guernica, that shows that you're sophisticated.
Well, even if that's true, I don't think the solution is making all painting simple. I mean, why not make art education free as well as museum tickets? Let's level up, not level down.
Ha, so you're agreeing with me. You want all artworks to be accessible.
Well, that's not exactly what I'm saying. I actually think we'd lose something really important if there were no challenging artworks out there in the world.
Oh, please, what would you lose? Your smug self-satisfaction?
Touche. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I mean things like the ability to get us thinking really hard about important questions, or to expand our horizons and challenge our perceptions.
That's fine and dandy, Professor Landy. But how do you make those benefits available to everyone?
Well, think about it this way. When artworks challenge you, it's not always because there's something you don't know. Oftentimes it's just because there's something they want you to do. I mean, think about Breaking Bad. That show asks us to make some pretty difficult moral judgments. But, it's a really popular show. You don't need to have gone to a snooty prep school to enjoy it.
Maybe not, but still, getting to watch TV for hours on end is a luxury. It's not for people who have to work 3 jobs. It's for people with lots of time on their hands.
So what, you're saying every single artwork should be immediately clear in every way to every human being?
Finally, you're getting it. Art should be for everyone, no matter where they come from or what they do for a living. Every human being deserves to have a life rich with aesthetic experiences, to feel that special sense of community, to have their imagination stimulated, to be raised above the mundane.
Every human being? Why stop there? How about cats and dogs? Don't you want Blossom to be raised above the mundane?
Funny you should ask. Actually, there is a whole world of art for dogs out there. We sent our roving philosophical reporter, Holly J. McDeed, to find out about it. She files this report.
Before you judge, meet Dr. Robert White Adams. He goes by Dr. Bob. He's a vet based in Somerset, England.
And a few years ago was involved in a project where we created an art exhibition or an art museum for dogs.
In preparation for the exhibit, he taught the artists involved to experience the world like dogs do, through a dimmer color palette and a profound sense of smell.
They're smelling what yesterday and 3 days ago and a week ago was. So their world that they build inside their heads has a whole extra dimension that we don't experience minute by minute. They have time built into their vision of the world in the form of smell.
The exhibition featured an open car window simulator that blew out aromas like old shoes, giant-sized dog bowls, paintings in colors to match a dog's color spectrum, dancing water jets that leapt from one dog bowl to the next. The dogs appeared to be enjoying themselves.
I had my own dog with me. She was a 9-year-old retriever then, and you can't help thinking there must be some doggy equivalent of bafflement, intrigue.
Most people thought it was kind of a joke. So I tried to take a look at it from a more serious standpoint.
Concepcion Cortez Zulueta is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Malaga in Spain.
And I usually work around the presence and agency of animals in contemporary art.
Her eyebrows raised when she heard that the exhibition was billed as the world's first for dogs. She's the author of papers such as The Seagull Stole My Camera and My Shot, overlapping metaphorical and physical distances in the human-animal camera triad. So she knows her stuff. She can think of at least 2 art exhibitions for dogs that took place back in the 70s. One was held in a seaside village in Spain. 2 artists held the exhibition with their dog, Chispas Luis.
He was there all the time. And so the dog became naturally involved in the collaboration.
They made music together. Paintings paid tribute to sausages and old boots, and at times the artists began to act like canines.
Because they were like territorial artists, like trying to win the other one.
In a separate show, one of the artists later recorded the sounds of sad dogs howling for the public. The humans enjoyed the show, but the artists recommended the canines stay away because
the dogs were like aware of the meaning more than their human companions.
And many decades later, the humans haven't stopped creating exhibits for 4-legged creatures. Jessica Dawson runs an exhibit and a concept called Dogumenta, with Micah Scalin and a Morkie named Rocky. When Dawson moved to New York City, she was overwhelmed by the artwork, not Rocky.
He was unleashed into the gallery space and went straight up to an artwork, sniffed it, looked around, just gave his whole body and all his senses and energy to the work around him. And I felt that I'd lost some of that.
It was clear she had a lot to learn from Rocky. The work in their first show followed in the tradition of art history, like one sculptural piece that was simple and blocky.
It had a grid, a light blue, very, very delicate grid of paint, pigment, that was reminiscent of Agnes Martin, another minimalist artist. So these are clear references. This is more for the humans. These are references for humans.
But in this show, these references are obsolete because it's the show for dogs. During the day, the pups began to mark the piece. And by mark, she means mark. This created a kind of drip.
Almost a Jackson Pollock drip at that point, because the pigment dripped down, and this was all created by the pups that came through the exhibition.
The piece changed over time, like the kind of interactive artwork very much in vogue these days. You could say it had similarities to Warhol's oxidation paintings. But more importantly, everyone was welcome to enjoy this space. People who had never been to art shows before showed up with their dogs. Lizards, turtles, and even cats showed up. It might seem ridiculous, but sometimes it's necessary to be transported away from the human world.
And I'm grateful to Rocky and all his four-legged friends for giving us that.
For Philosophy Talk, I'm Holly J. McTeed.
Thanks for that excellent roving report, Holly. I'm Josh Landy. With me is my Stanford colleague, Ray Briggs, and today we're asking whether the arts should be for everyone.
We're joined now by Catharine Abell, who's a professor of philosophy and art at the University of Oxford and author of Fiction, a Philosophical Analysis. Catharine, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thank you very much.
So, Catharine, you've been writing about the arts for some time now. What first got you interested in the topic?
Well, when I was young, my mother used to drag me to lots of art galleries, and I always found it incredibly boring. But something must have sunk in, because when I went to graduate school, I was drawn to philosophical topics about art and the arts, and I found I had, clear opinions about them in ways I don't about other philosophical topics.
So, Catharine, what do you think? Should all art be accessible?
Well, all art should be accessible to at least somebody, because if it's not accessible, I think art exists to be appreciated, and if it's not accessible to anyone, it's failing to do that. But I don't think all art should be accessible to everybody.
So why not? Why not say, democratize, make all art accessible to every human being?
Because I think the reasons why we value and appreciate art are such that sometimes you do require background knowledge to appreciate them. And when people don't have that background knowledge, those artworks are inaccessible to them. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't be produced.
Do you think that there's some art that should be accessible to everybody?
I think all other things being equal, being accessible is a good thing, and the more accessible, the better. But I think sometimes we appreciate artwork for reasons that we need some background knowledge to appreciate. So, for example, originality. You can't tell if a painting's original unless you know what paintings came before it, and that requires some knowledge.
That is kind of a strange example, I think, because I might well be able to appreciate the painting without knowing it's original. Like, I might be able to appreciate what it's about. Is that a case where I have some but not complete access, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's going on in those kinds of cases. And many artworks operate on different levels, and they might be partially accessible to people without being wholly accessible, I suppose.
I like that thought about different levels. It makes me think maybe it's not a simple on-off switch, right? An artwork is accessible or not accessible, but you think about, Shakespeare's plays, about how popular they were because they appeal in a really direct way, or something like Game of Thrones, which is obviously a wonderful series of books and a wonderful series of TV episodes. But, a lot of people can watch it. Some people will just enjoy the plot and the characters, and others will get really stuck into the difficult moral questions. Does that seem like a reasonable way of thinking about it? That it's a spectrum. It's not just a accessible on, inaccessible off.
Yeah, I think in the case of most artworks, that's exactly right, especially artworks that have representational content, right? Because most people can see what a picture depicts and appreciate that, even if they don't have the kind of understanding of the process involved in producing that painting to understand exactly how the artist would have had to go about painting it and the sort of skill involved.
So I'm thinking about my appreciation of historical artworks and noticing that I can't have been in the intended audience for most of those, and yet they've translated across cultures so that I can appreciate them. Do you think that there's something about some works of art that makes them more likely to translate in that way?
Yeah, sometimes it's something to do with the work of art. So sometimes artworks have universal themes or speak to universal issues, and this guarantees that they translate across different historical periods. But it also might just be a contingent fact about which artistic traditions have endured and which haven't, such that we can understand works from the past that are in part of familiar traditions whereas other traditions might have died out, and we find the arts in those traditions sort of more inaccessible and difficult to understand.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're thinking about whether the arts should be for everyone, with Catharine Abell from Oxford University.
Are there poems you love that other people don't get? Are there novels you hate because they're needlessly obscure? What's the point of making artworks that not everyone can understand?
The aims of art, plus your comments and questions when Philosophy Talk continues.
Jewels and binoculars hang from the head of the mule. But these visions of Johanna, they make it all seem so cruel.
Is it cruel to the viewer when a painting is inscrutable? I'm Josh Landy, and this is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Accept your intelligence. I'm Ray Briggs, and we're thinking about The Arts for All with Catharine Abell from the University of Oxford, author of Fiction, A Philosophical Analysis.
We're pre-recording this episode, so unfortunately we can't take your phone calls today, but you can always email us at comments@philosophytalk.org, or you can comment on our website, where you can also become a subscriber and gain access to our library of more than 500 episodes.
So, Catharine, why would an artist choose to create an artwork that not everyone can readily understand?
That's a very good question. I think sometimes artists have goals that they can only pursue at the expense of accessibility. So sometimes we value artworks because they teach us something about the world we live in. They have cognitive value. But if the author of a literary work, for example, wants to write a historical novel that accurately portrays how things were at the time it issued, she might have to write something that not every contemporary viewer is going to relate to. So consider a historical novel in which all the female characters do exactly what they're told by their husbands or their fathers. Modern audience is not going to relate to that at all, but historical accuracy might require things to be represented in that way.
Yeah, that's a great example. And that sounds like a case where the difficulty is basically background knowledge. But I want to come back to a distinction that Ray and I were making in our opening conversation. Some artworks are difficult because they require background knowledge. Other artworks are difficult because they require us to work hard, or a bit of both. So I'm curious about those cases too, because I think some of my favorite artworks don't necessarily require much background information. But goodness me, do they put us through our paces, right? They're like Virginia Woolf. They're really, the language is so beautiful and dense, and you're not always sure whose perspective you're in, and you don't quite know where the author stands on certain really important moral questions. So what's the value of that kind of difficulty?
Interesting question. I don't think difficulty in and of itself is valuable. But there might be some aim that an artist is trying to pursue that results in that sort of difficulty. So, for example, take an artist who's trying to express a very complex emotion or a very complex attitude towards a set of events. That might result in something that doesn't wear its message on its sleeve, that we have to work really hard to get at.
So this is making me think actually of the poet Cathy Park Hong, who writes in English, Spanish, and Korean, and has said that she specifically aims to achieve a kind of disfluency in her poetry that's meant to mimic the disfluency of being in a culture that wasn't really built for you. So I wonder if that's an example of a case where difficulty is actually part of the point.
Yeah, that sounds like it. Yeah. And by making it difficult for the viewer, she's putting us in her shoes, it sounds like.
Yeah.
That's a lovely example, because you've got all these different possible aims that an artist could have, right? One, transmitting some idea about the world. Another, this beautiful one here of helping the reader feel what it's like to be someone in that position, to be the author. What about cases where artists are trying to help us cultivate certain mental skills, right? I think about For example, Plato's dialogues, where they're kind of weird and wacky at times. And some of us think that the point is to make us better reasoners. So there's not necessarily a particular message from a stretch of weird argumentation, but it's designed to help us cultivate our mental skills. And in that case, there might be a kind of a necessary difficulty, right? It might be something that's not immediately accessible to everyone, but there's a reason, because it makes us active. And if we're active, we practice. And if we practice, we're more likely to get perfect. What do you think about that way of thinking about it?
Yeah, I think there are especially cognitive values that art can provide us with that do exactly involve artworks trying to train us up at something. So Martha Nussbaum discusses Henry James's novel The Golden Bowl, which is notoriously inaccessible. I mean, I tried reading it and gave up. So, but she thinks that what's valuable, or one thing that's valuable about that novel, is that it involves attention to all the morally relevant aspects of the situation it represents, and that it can train us. I don't know if I agree with her, but she thinks it can train us as readers to become people on whom the morally relevant aspects of a situation are not lost. So better moral observers, better moral people, by virtue of being better at recognizing the morally relevant aspects of the situation.
So actually, I have a question about morality and difficulty that also relates to an example that you gave earlier of historical novels with about societies with sexist rules. So I think actually for a lot of readers, the main barrier there is not information. Like, it's not that hard to know that there have been a lot of patriarchal societies in the world, but there's a kind of barrier of like being able to morally empathize with people with really different values from your own.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's very difficult for authors to get us to empathize with people with very different values than those we have. I mean, how can we sort of think of a character as being fundamentally decent when he beats his children or something when they do something wrong, although that might be what he takes himself to be?
Right. Do you have thoughts on how to write historical fiction where realism kind of demands that you portray people in not the best light, but empathy demands that you portray them in at least a light where a reader can care about them?
Not really. I mean, I can see how tricky it is, but I'm happy to leave that job to the historical novelist, I guess. I think it's an inevitable trade-off. I really don't see how you can do both those things.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're thinking about the arts for all with Catharine Abell from the University of Oxford. And we have an email from Nancy. Nancy says, I think all arts should be accessible and taught in schools. So what do you think about that, Catherine? You were saying that your mom dragged you to museums when you were a kid. It didn't always go so well. I won't share my experiences, but I think they're somewhat similar. What do you think? Do you think arts should be taught in schools?
I guess it depends what's meant by taught. I think school children should be exposed to art, but I think it's probably better for them to be able to respond to it in their own way and find their own way to the kinds of things it has to offer, rather than being told, find this, engaging for this reason. Or you can steer people to appreciate art, but I don't think you can force them to find things valuable that you find valuable.
So one aspect of art education that I tend to care a lot about is not just teaching people to look at art, but giving them space to make art. So visual arts classes, music classes. Do you think that this is a good way of making art more accessible to people by educating them in what it is to actually have to create a work of art?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's crucially important. When you've tried to make a painting yourself, you're much better placed to appreciate the kind of achievement involved in other people doing painting things, and the same goes with music.
You know, one of the things that I think about when I think about the question of art for everyone is the idea of everyone making art, right? So I think, one way of thinking about it is, let's have art makers make art that is really accessible. Maybe it works on multiple levels. It doesn't have to be simplistic, but it should be accessible at the first level, and then there's lots of depths that you can dive into. But another way of thinking about it is, the French poet Lautréamont said, poetry must be made by all, not by one. So let's have everyone write poetry. Or we could think about, Brecht. Brecht wrote plays to be performed, but he also wrote plays that, in a sense, the audience performs, right? He wrote plays where the point was not that you sit there passively and watch, but you get involved, and there's something to be learned from the experience of being an actor, maybe even co-writing something, or you do improv or something like that. So what about this? Art for all, in the sense of everyone's making art.
Why not? I see absolutely no cost to that.
Do you see a value to that?
Yes, I do see a value to that. I mean, not just the value that I've already talked about in, the process, trying to make stuff, giving you a better appreciation of, what's involved in other people making it. But also, I think, thinking about what you have to contribute, the kinds of things you can offer that other people might be able to appreciate artistically, it is a wonderful thing for everybody to do.
I'm also wondering about the role of audience members in making art accessible to ourselves. So as a reader of, say, a novel from a different culture, I have choices. Like, I can choose to look up words that are unfamiliar, or to go read some history of the culture that the novel is from. And so if a novel isn't accessible to me and I could have worked harder to access it, isn't that on me?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we have limited time and resources, and we have to decide which things we're going to follow up on in that way. So I suppose that there needs to be an initial level of accessibility to prompt you to think, I need to find out more about that culture, or look up that word.
I have thought a little bit about this in my capacity as a poet, which is a hobby that I sometimes publish in. So I remember a reviewer complained about my first book that I put in footnotes really endnotes at the end of the book, where I told you what some of the philosophical ideas were that I was referencing in the poems, and where you could read more about them. And the reviewer said, look, wouldn't it be better to leave the audience to figure this out for themselves instead of browbeating with it? And I disagree, but I sort of wonder if there is sort of also a value in leaving the audience to figure things out for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think the process of figuring it out for yourself is going to result in some sort of discovery not contained within the footnotes, then it seems worthwhile letting people figure it out for themselves. But it doesn't. It seems to me fine to have footnotes in a great many cases, right? But perhaps there's sometimes greater value in imaginatively projecting yourself into, thinking about the philosophical ideas for yourself rather than just having them explained to you.
That seems right to me. I mean, I think of a number of really extraordinary artworks, like Toni Morrison's novel *A Mercy*, Spike Lee's *Do the Right Thing*, Mary Shelley's *Frankenstein*, where there isn't a clear statement or a clear guiding belief. They're really interesting and important questions, vital questions. But we're being asked to do an awful lot of work ourselves in coming down on where we stand. And I think there's a genuine value to that. I mean, there can be value in other kinds of artwork too. But could you say a little bit more about that? Why do so many of these truly extraordinary artworks ask us to do this work, ask us to take a stand, make a decision? They deliberately withhold judgment on some really important questions.
Well, I guess there's a big difference to just being told something as a flat statement and coming to that to believe the content of the statement yourself. And when you form beliefs, you look for justification for those beliefs. And perhaps that's what's going on in cases like that. When we think about what's going on and work it out for ourselves, we have reason. We have good reasons for the kind of views we form in a way that we don't if they're just sort of handed to us.
So we've got an email from Marianne who says, in the future, there's going to be less work, and we're going to need more art to fulfill our times as human beings. So what do you think?
Yeah, maybe. Well, if she hasn't got any work, she could start making her own art, couldn't she?
I mean, it seems like a great thing to do. I mean, it's right. Some might even argue maybe this is a little hyperbolic, but that it's that kind of thing that constitutes human flourishing, right? Not just doing your job to make money to earn food. There's that lovely line from Du Bois, right? That the aim of college isn't meat. The aim of college is to understand the value of that life that meat nourishes. And well, art is one of those things that gives life its value. Would you go that far, Catherine?
Yes, absolutely. I'd go that far. I think it's no accident that people with tons and tons of money spend it on paintings or artworks, because it's not the money that's making them happy. They're looking for that's just pop psychology, isn't it? But they're looking for some source of value. And I think, yeah, art does play that role in people's lives.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today we're thinking about Arts for All with Catharine Abell from the University of Oxford, author of Fiction, a Philosophical Analysis.
What can we do to make art more accessible for everyone? Should all museums be free? Does the art world need to do more to include disabled patrons?
Painting for the people, plus commentary from Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher, when Philosophy Talk continues. Why should Beethoven just roll over and make way for something more accessible, like rhythm and blues? I'm Josh Landy, and this is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Accept your intelligence. I'm Ray Briggs. Our guest is Catharine Abell from the University of Oxford, and we're thinking about the arts for all.
So, Catharine, I wonder if we could come back to something we were talking about earlier in the show, about a particular kind of accessibility. Accessibility for people on low incomes, people with disabilities. What can the artists and the art world do to solve those kind of problems, to make art accessible to as many people as possible in those particular ways?
Well, I think artists can make works that talk to the experiences of a more diverse range of people is one thing. And art galleries and other arts institutions can provide ways of experiencing their artworks that speak to a wider range of people. So just to use one example, let people touch the sculptures.
Right. So I actually wonder about sort of some, I guess, what people would call low art too. I cannot tell you how many shows I've been to in basements that required stairs, or events at places that smelled like something. Is there a way on a budget also to make art more accessible?
Yeah, I think so. I think one interesting issue here is the distinction between art that's reproducible and art that's not. So, a novel, for example, is infinitely reproducible. So lots and lots of people can have access to copies of a novel. And we think of the visual arts as not being like that. There's only one of a painting, and often prints come in limited editions, but there's no reason actually why many prints shouldn't be infinitely reproduced in the way that works of literature are.
That's really interesting. It makes me think about artworks like bridges. We're lucky enough to be in a town that has the Golden Gate Bridge, architecture, sculpture that's out there in the world and that definitely you can touch and climb on and interact with. Maybe could that kind of thing be a way to bring the aesthetic to masses of people? Many people drive over the Golden Gate Bridge twice a day, 5 times a week. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think it's a sort of element of historical accident to what we call art and what we don't. I think bridges are conceived as aesthetic objects, and they're out there in the world, and we should look for the aesthetic dimension of the things that we all do have access to.
I'm also wondering about this concept of art as dialogue, which I sometimes find useful. So, in order to participate in a dialogue, I need to it helps to be talking to somebody who's similar to me rather than different from me, although it's not essential. But I also need to have the space to engage with the other person. And do you think that there are ways of giving all of us more space in our lives to engage with aesthetic objects?
Good question. What do you mean by space exactly?
Right. I think I mean I need to not be thinking about other things too hard. Like I not need to not be thinking about my job or my bank account at that moment. And I need to be able to focus in on the art. Maybe I need some quiet and leisure.
Yeah, that seems right. But I suppose, one issue here is where we situate work, going back to Josh's talking about the bridge and things. Maybe put artworks in places where people go when they are taking time out from their jobs, etc., but not in the way where they have to make a special trip to the gallery, but just going for a walk.
I'm still curious about artworks that seem inaccessible, because many of my favorite artworks are artworks that are really tough. I think about, again, Toni Morrison's novel Mercy, that starts in that really confusing way, and it's also a novel that deliberately tempts us to make a mistake. And I love artworks like this. Proust does this. Jane Austen does it in Pride and Prejudice. There's no way to avoid making a very specific mistake about what happens. So is there a value in that kind of, it doesn't make it totally inaccessible, but it makes what Ray just referred to as the dialogue a really interesting dialogue between the author and the reader, where the author is setting a trap for the reader that's supposed to be salutary in some way. Does that seem just kind of snobbish and cruel and unfair to you? Or does that seem like a cool thing that art can do?
I think it's in the category of a cool thing that art can do. I think it's nice to be reminded not to be complacent as an audience, as an appreciator of art, and just sort of think, yeah, I know the gig here. I know exactly how this works and how to, interact with this work. I think it's good to be reminded to be an active reader, to engage our intelligence. But I also think that it's part of what artists are sometimes doing when they make difficult art is pushing the rules and innovating, and not just sort of taking for granted the sort of art forms that exist as they exist, but trying to do something new. And that is going to be very difficult to engage with and understand, but worthwhile ultimately, because it opens up new possibilities for art that didn't exist before, and new possibilities for audiences perhaps too.
Yeah, I think about Manet's Olympia, which was famously scandalous when it first came out, and no one could understand. Everyone understood it, and now we all love it. And it's expanded the range of what's possible and what's beautiful for us. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, so I also have been thinking about art that is difficult for some audiences and not for every audience. So art for me as an English-speaking American that's difficult might be really easy for somebody from another country to understand. So when we say accessible, like who are we really talking about accessibility for? Is there really a generic reader for whom art can be accessible?
No, I think the answer to that is a pretty clear no. But obviously, even though there isn't a generic audience member, I don't think for any art form, it's still possible for artwork to be more or less accessible, even relative to, you know, an intended audience or the audience that it in fact reaches.
Right. Yeah. So then again, I'm kind of curious when I'm making decisions for an artwork that I'm creating. Uh, like when do I try to make my audience work hard? And is there like sometimes value in making some of the audience work harder than other audience members? So I'm also thinking about like work by sort of queer and trans authors that doesn't take regular like heteronormative assumptions about what relationships look like as its starting point. So is that like in a sense that's more accessible, and in a sense it's less accessible depending on who's doing the reading or the looking?
That's right. And in cases like that, it looks like there can be value in being inaccessible or hard to for certain groups to access because the very process of trying to understand what's going on helps educate people about perspectives other than their own. And I take it that's can be part of the point of the work.
Yeah, and of course, and it's building and cementing communities, which I think is a really important feature of it. And I mean, some of these more difficult artworks get us talking together, and that cements us in terms of our social relationships. I wonder if like what if the right slogan might be something like "Some art for all art for some." Right? I think it's awesome that there are TV shows everybody watches, like Game of Thrones or whatever, but it's also great there's niche stuff. And the cool thing is, everyone can have niche stuff, right? There's niche art for you, for me, for everyone. It might be different niche stuff, but there's something for everyone. What do you think about that? Like that, you know, it's okay for some artworks to strive for a limited audience or to end up with a limited audience because you know, well, maybe you're not in that artwork's audience, but you're in this one, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, that seems exactly right to me. I mean, people are different. Not everybody's the same. And so if all art strove to be accessible to everyone, we'd end up with something that was pretty dull to everyone, I imagine.
Now I just have to ask, what's your favorite niche artwork?
Oh gosh. How niche does it have to be?
As niche as you like.
I don't know. So I really like the novels of this woman called Anita Bruckner, and they're kind of inaccessible in the sense that they're very, very depressing. So I'm not quite sure why I like them so much. But, you know, and she just talks about one lonely woman who has an opportunity for happiness and then misses it. And all her novels are a bit like that. I don't know if that's inaccessible, but I kind of really love them despite the sort of limited scope and the kind of, unremittingly depressing tone.
That makes perfect sense to me, right? That some of us resonate with more depressing works or works that address a particular facet of the human experience, and others resonate with others. So I say, why not? Do you think that there are any works that you'd want to say something negative about in this context? Do you think there are any works that are just too niche or too exclusionary, too snobby, elitist, something like that?
I certainly think it's a possibility. And sometimes I think bad art tries to pass itself off as niche when really it's just bad. But you know, being niche for niche's sake has got to be a bad thing, right?
Yeah, I can't say there are many artworks I love that are like that. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
Our guest has been Catharine Abell, professor of philosophy of art at the University of Oxford and author of Fiction, a philosophical analysis. So, Josh, what are you thinking now?
Well, inevitably, I'm thinking about Proust, I suppose, because I always do. I mean, that's a 3,000-page novel with crazy sentences that are up to 4 pages long, but it's so worth it. I mean, there's just nothing like it as an experience of reading, and it can be genuinely life-changing.
Ah, Proust. That sounds like fun. I'll be over here listening to Lizzo. We'll put links to everything we've mentioned today on our website, philosophytalk.org, where you can also become a subscriber and gain access to our library of more than 500 episodes.
And if you have a conundrum that's bedeviling you, a personal dilemma in your life that might benefit from philosophical insight, send it to us at conundrums@philosophytalk.org, and maybe we can think it through together on the air.
Now, an acquired taste if there ever was one. It's Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes, the woke culture has wounded the great beast we call art history. It's all dead white men, and excluded people want to be seen. And it's not safe. Too many sad naked women battles alcoholic fantasies of unhappy expressiveness. We don't feel comfortable. It's not okay. Of course, the idea that art should be challenging is relatively new. If art had a little bite, it was in the execution, not the subject, which was dictated by the marketplace. So you did a portrait of Napoleon and his mighty pony, or the wife of Lord Pooh Bah, or a great silly landscape that took up a wall, buying you time to concentrate on your canvas of Flemish demons devouring peasants. Now, I love going to museums. I'd be a highly cultured guy if I had the stamina and money. Grab a show, late dinner, catch a jazz act, wind up tap dancing down the street with a sexy beatnik mama just as the street cleaners come around. Culture is always hinged on a couple of things, though. Education and money. You have to know who Renoir is if you want to see him. You have to shell out big dough to see the war horse at the Met. And the center of it all was New York City. Until recently, the arts belonged to gay white men and rich old white ladies. The gay white men to curate the art, and the rich white ladies to own it. The rest of us to glimpse for one brief shining long weekend in the Big Apple, and then take the bus back home to Indiana. But now political correctness has thrown big wrenches into art appreciation. We should be amazed at the play of sunlight on a stream of milk in a Vermeer, maybe read up on the pigments he made from crushed pebbles imported from Turkey, what kind of pig he bred to make his brushes. But now that's all elitist, cisgen, objectifying patriarchal hoo-ha. Museums now offer video loops, installations, abstract sculptures made of scabs, sandwich bags, and worn-down bars of soap, I think. I haven't been to a museum since the COVID hit. Between social distancing and white imperialist shaming, I'm amazed we have any culture left to shun. But lately I've been wondering where statues fit into all this. Sculptures used to be the bomb, art-wise. Massive, big bronze depictions of Atlas holding up the world, Trojan guys on marble wrestling big twisty snakes. Corporate appreciators would commission giant cubes toppling in the square in front of their headquarters, a 30-foot-tall metal sheet in front of the bank that passersby avoided because they were afraid it might fall on them. And back in the late 19th century, statues of Confederate generals began to be erected in town squares all across America. Their construction coincided with the Jim Crow years from 1890 to the mid-1950s, paid for, I have no doubt, by white ladies whose deep purses also funded museums, symphonies, and Southern historical societies. This is probably a huge boost to the sculpture industry. Now, there are only so many places to display marble depictions of Stonewall Jackson, the size and weight of a 1973 Buick Rivera. Small town parks stepped up to that plate. I'm not sure anybody asked the townspeople if they wanted a statue of a loser general cluttering up the commons, but once it was there, it was fine, especially if you count the more obscure ones like Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was also the first Grand Wizard of the KKK. Statues are educational and epic, like having your own Rushmore a block away from the hardware store. It's also part of the great whitewash of the Civil War, where the South became noble in defeat, full of juleps and cotillions, and slavery was not talked about at the supper table. Then came the death of downtown. No more statues, only Santa, Easter Bunny, and Halloween Superstore at the mall. Seasonal, not historical. Throw in Black Lives Matter, the new distaste for representation in art, and those statues were coming down. A little foresight might have meant making a warehouse museum for them like they did with the Soviet heroes, but oh well, styles come and go. But if we ever do go back to hero praising in the public square, and if we've lost the war, keep an eye on those generals. In the park one day, haul to the dump in a flatbed truck the next. Avoid the heartbreak, small-town America. Turn to gazebos. Bring in a trad jazz combo on a hot summer night. Sit and fan yourself while the kids chase fireflies, and if bored teenagers graffiti the thing on some drunken midnight, well, you know, that's art too in some quarters. And much easier to export to New York City than Robert E. Lee surveying the battlefield and what was the name of his damn horse? Traveler. Can't believe I remember that. I gotta go.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of KALW, Local Public Radio San Francisco, and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2020.
Our executive producer is Tina Pamantwan.
The senior producer is Devin Strolovich. Laura McGuire is our director of research. Cindy Prince-Baum is our director of marketing.
Thanks also to Merle Kessler, Angela Johnston, and Lauren Schechter.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from various groups at Stanford University and from the partners at our online community of thinkers.
The views expressed, or misexpressed, on this program did not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
Not even when they're true and reasonable. The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org, where you too can become a partner in our community of thinkers. I'm Josh Landy.
And I'm Ray Briggs. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.
He transcends time and space.
He sickens me.